Not many games can catch your attention long enough when they cost so little, but today we're going to be taking a look to see if this mismatched indie game is actually worth your time and, more importantly, your money. Released onto the Steam store back in April, it was welcomed with a relatively mediocre reception, as is the norm with most of Rewind Apps' games, which generally consist of shorter indie-based titles created in Unity, and I think you know the type. My car of course being no exception to this, with them offering about 3 new games every month on average, despite this one still being in early access. But it does have some relatively positive reviews, and a very low price, with most games consisting of a price lower than the cheapest burger at McDonald's. The game consists of 3 primary areas, the first of which is customization, and the game does actually have it. We're talking paints and vinyls, with around 3 choices of decals if you include no decals is a real option. These can then be applied across the car in different ways to create unique and horrifying colour schemes that look absolutely terrible regardless of what way you combine them, that you can learn to love and hate the design of your car over time, because either way this game isn't going to get any prettier. Either way, you can customize the whole of 2 cars in this case, with the game coming with unique designs and vinyls for both of them, including little bits of information that the developers may be from a country we all know and love. Regardless of this, the customization is nice, but it's a pain in the arse to click in some places, with some clicks not even registering at all. But what happens when you're done painting your racing beast of a car? Well, that brings us on to stage 2 of the game. Stage 2 consists of actually modifying the engine of your car, which mainly works the same way a 90s point-and-click adventure game does when you get a bit confused. You just click frantically and hope for the best, which is really the only way to go about dismantling the engine in this game, as sometimes you'll miss one part and it'll be incredibly small and you won't be able to find it the next time. You can hide the main body of the car, even in the tyres if you want, which is a nice addition to the game and does make the visibility much nicer when you're trying to work on things like this. But what can you do from here? Well, once you've stripped down the engine fully, you can't actually change much about it. Well, there's a shop that fits parts in, it's very primitive, and you have money that you can spend on some things, but there's no way to earn money, and buying every part in the shop still doesn't decrease this amount too much. So you get to spend money on things like sports parts, which exist, but very few of them actually work, and there are a few cosmetic things, but ultimately, as mentioned, they don't really do much to your car, and most of the time you'll just get an error saying it won't work. But that's about as sophisticated as the game's engine customization system gets. Which brings us neatly onto stage 3 of this so-called game. Racing. Well, we've customized this car, we've painted it, and we've even modified it slightly, but what exactly does putting it on the track mean? Well, not exactly much. The course is poorly made, constructed entirely out of things placed randomly around with little in the way of redeeming qualities. The actual course appears to have some obstacles placed around it, which allows you to test out not only the speed, but the stability of your vehicle, which brings us on to category 1 of this test, the physics engine. For one side of the game, most racing games have to have good physics. It's one of the main things in it that affects everything from handling to the speeds of the vehicles, and this game does a half-decent job for its price, as it's an early stage of the game, which is something we'll have to bring up later on. Generally, the cars don't seem to clip through most items on the main track, but there are still some anomalies when it comes to collisions with the floor. Objects around the course exactly don't really share the same level of care, and the ramps seem to have an invisible layer left between them, probably because they're a poorly implemented stock asset, once again something we'll touch on later, as seems to be the case with most basic areas of the game. This sort of doesn't work very well, and there's some textures on the floor that, although affect your car, only really affect the speed of the vehicle and not so much exactly the handling, which isn't exactly a good thing when you're trying to control the textures and actually make them have an effect on the vehicle. I can appreciate there was an attempt to include some physics in a more varied way, but it wasn't very well done. Bring us on to the next category of the game, the handling. How exactly do the various cars handle in this game? Well, I'm pleased to say there's an ever so slight difference between how they handle, increasing of the power makes them less stable, and removing parts seems to reduce the weight of the vehicles once again, making them more unstable but even quicker, not that they actually get very fast in the end. It's a sort of half-hearted attempt in some areas, due to the terrain playing very little difference in how the cars control, but it's nice to mess around with different combinations and see if you can create the best attempt at a racing vehicle there is. But do be warned that as much as you customize, there's only so much you can change, as covered earlier. The actual variation of the map is somewhat decent. It's nothing spectacular, and there's lots of ramps placed outside that don't really make much sense. There's a basic course which is fairly easy to tackle, and it's not very large, but there's large portions of grass on either side, which, as mentioned earlier, don't exactly make it difficult to drive due to the little difference it makes to the handling of the vehicle. It ends in one giant loop of the system, with roughly two main ways to leave the track and explore the surrounding lands, which is surrounded by mountains, of which are fairly well done, for obvious reason later on, which we'll talk about. You can scale them about as well as you'd expect, with them presenting themselves as a tough feat to scale, but something you can do if you persevere. Not that it's very fun actually doing that. There are loop-the-loops presented around the map that work well if you approach them right. Unfortunately, it's far too easy to become stuck in the bottom of them, clipping beneath the surface of the world, which is far too difficult to escape from, usually resulting in you having to go back to the garage and start again. This continues all the way throughout, with certain obstacles presenting the issues themselves, as they're either too large, strangely placed, or just thrown in randomly. It adds variety, but quantity over quality seems to be the case here, which is never a good thing for a single-leveled racing game. Music-wise, the game has a large portion of songs, which isn't exactly great, as most of them come off as slightly generic techno in a similar vein to the early Forza games, but with far less variation. It fits the style of the game, but there isn't much in the way of audio control either, and the game defaults to random speakers whenever it wants to, so if you're using two sets like me with earphones and main speakers, expect a 50-50 chance that the game will suddenly blare out of your main speakers for absolutely no reason. Finally, optimization-wise, the game will run on virtually everything. And I mean virtually everything. The PC from the last video was able to run this game and record it at the same time, because that was just a Pentium D based machine, so I can pretty much vouch for these requirements that, albeit basic, are accurate. But why is this the case? Well, it wasn't long before I did some more snooping around the development history of this game, as I never bought it for myself and probably never would have. It was here that I found the game as a basic asset flip of the Unity project, Keyree's car constructor, with a few modifications made in certain areas like the map, which explains the odd clipping issues which aren't present in this Unity asset. Oddly enough, this asset package retails for around £20, and is what a lot of curators are saying. So I suppose we're going to see exactly what the developer is doing with a lot of their games which do mention asset flipping. To give you an idea, Street Legal Racing is based on the same Unity asset pack, but utilises it much better and is a much more well-composed game. So I delved further into the Steam store, and what can I say, the game has not had updates for very long. The game contains new vehicles, a new physics system, new maps, a nitro system, a weather system, and multiplayer, and even more stunt ramp, apparently, in the coming updates. But let's be honest, I doubt any of these are going to happen, and yes, the game is 30p, but is it really worth that? I mean, you can waste a few hours on it, but this is all it's really going to get. It's a Unity asset pack that you're paying an extra 30p for when you could just download the demo straight from the website. Personally, my main recommendation would be to avoid this game that overpromises and underdelivers. It lists its features right, but realistically all it's listing is the Unity project's assets with a few things it's added in. It doesn't matter how much the company manages to advertise the added multiple stunt ramp. The game is more of a scam than a real game, so personally I'd recommend avoiding My Car on Steam unless you fancy messing about with a 30p asset flip, but even then you'd be supporting a company that's trying to release games they haven't really made. They don't try to hide the fact too well that all the curators are holding against them, that they can't actually make a game and just seem to flip over assets that they didn't make. I mean, sure, they update some of their games, but realistically they are contributing to the problem with Steam. I remember back in the days of Greenlight, you could look through the little cheap games and occasionally grab a hidden gem to play, but they weren't too hidden because you actually had to vote on the games that made it to Steam. But nowadays, with junk like this passing through the gates onto early access, it's just too easy to make a quick buck out of work that isn't even your own. I hope this review of a cheap Steam game has been helpful, and if you guys want to see more information and more little reviews like this on cheap junk, please do let me know. Thank you very much for watching this new style of video. Good night. So I thought I'd try out a bit of a different style because you guys wanted to see a review of this game, and in all honesty I don't recommend you guys go out and get it. If you want to see more videos like this, I can always try and do one a week alongside the normal content which is on the way, as it wasn't too difficult to do and I found it rather entertaining to do myself, so I'll catch you guys then.